I'm your host, Dr. Catherine Clinton, and I'm honored today to be joined by Dr. Leland Stillman. He is a uh, graduate of the environmental health at Connecticut College and received his medical doctorate from the University of Virginia. He specializes in internal medicine, and his mentors include a vast variety of medical practitioners. And today he works with people all over the world, and he addresses all aspects of diet, lifestyle, mindset, environment to truly impact health. When you work with Leland, he absolutely embodies that Hippocratic oath and dives deep into quantum biology. So I'm really excited to hear what Dr. Stillman has to share with us today about circadian medicine and quantum biology. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. And I first was introduced to you on Instagram, and I instantly was attracted to all of your talk about circadian medicine, the benefit of sunshine, and of course, some of the corruption we see in our mainstream medical system. So I'd love
Right.
to start with how you got involved in circadian medicine, quantum biology, some of these newer aspects of our medicine.
So I was really brought up by a naturopath who mentored me very closely from the time I was a teenager until my late 20s. And then graduated from my residency program. After that, I went out and joined a practice in Tampa, Florida, where they were doing really cutting edge, a lot of IV glutathione, IV aminos, minerals, IV nutrition in general, and saw some really amazing results, but also saw some people who did not get better despite whatever we did, and that was very confusing to me. This was the kind of place where if you were the people who were there had really tried everything. They were very keen and intent on getting a result, an outcome, so they could go back to live their lives.
Mhm,
Most of them were pretty much permanently, or I'm not going to say permanently, but they were very disabled.
mhm,
And so we were able to do great things for some of them, but then I just was really puzzled by some of these cases that we couldn't get any traction on. And one of them, because they tended to do a lot of digging and a lot of research on their own, and they would bring things to me that I'd never even heard of. The list of that I could talk about for a long time. But one of them brought to me the work of this guy named Jack Kruse, who's a neurosurgeon, who was one of the first people to really start talking about
mhm,
not just the theory of circadian biology, but the actual practice and the implications of circadian biology, and particularly of like quantum world and medicine at the quantum level. So I quit working at that clinic because it wasn't a good fit personally or really professionally. And I ended up moving out to Denver, Colorado. But that recommendation that patient had made to look into Dr. Cruz's work stuck with me, and I dove into his work as soon as I got out there. And I just read and I read and I read. And the more I read, the more interesting I thought it was. And then all of a sudden, things started to make sense to me about why patients at that clinic hadn't been getting the results that they wanted. And, I use that clinic as an example, but frankly, like at this point, I've seen people who've gone all over the world, Swiss medical clinics and, therapeutic hyperthermia in Germany at the St. George Clinic and, other various destination wellness centers here in the United States from, Dr. Hyman's Ultra Wellness Center up in Lenox, Massachusetts to Dietrich Klinghart's Institute over in Seattle
mhm,
and, back. And so what I found was that, or what I started to realize was that these young people, the people who didn't get good results, were the people who had lots of problems with their quantum environment. They were not, or they were very inundated by EMF. They thought that these things were not harmful. They had wireless earphones that they were on all the time. They'd be getting like an infusion of nutrients and they would be like microwaving their brain where the nutrients are supposed to be working. They have their laptops on their lap microwaving their, you know, uh, pelvis while they're
mhm,
getting these nutrients. They are baking in blue and green light, shutting down their melatonin, ruining their sleep wake cycles. They wind up with insomnia, crippling anxiety. What do? They pick up the phone, they start scrolling Instagram, they get the dopamine hit, it calms them down or at least distracts them from whatever's going on. So this is what I was seeing, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. It makes sense to me why these people are not getting well. And then I started to bring it into my practice, and frankly, have seen amazing results without having to touch any kind of supplements, medications, whatever, for a lot of patients.
Mhm.
And I've spent the last, I don't know, 5 6 years now, almost 6 years, really trying to dial in the approach to and really bring together, I think is the best of functional integrative natural medicine and quantum medicine. I think that the integrative and natural health space is really interesting because up until really the late 1990s and early 2000s, there wasn't a lot of EMF around. I mean, there were magnetic and electrical fields. There was dirty electricity, but people weren't microwaving themselves 24/7 with smart devices and Fitbits and all this other stuff.
Mhm.
And then on top of that, the screens we had were very limited. Sure, you could watch TV all night, but that was nothing compared to what people are inundated with now, where they have the iPad and the phone and the TV, and that harsh LED, high blue, high green lighting. So the magnitude of the problem on a quantum level, from the perspective of how much light and EMF people were getting, just was nowhere near as bad. So there's a lot of really great stuff in natural, integrative, functional, whatever you want to call it, medicine from um, that doesn't take into account any of this quantum stuff. But you really have to integrate the quantum stuff if you're really going to get good results in 2022. Because if you miss things like EMF, big EMF exposures, if you don't address things like artificial light, if you don't address things like lack of sunlight, there's so many patients and so many cases where they don't actually get results, which is unfortunate but all too real. So that's how I got
Absolutely.
into the quantum biology thing. It was treatment failure and patients not getting better and me wondering why.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. It's been life-changing applying these to my patients and my own health. And to hear a board certified internal medicine doctor say that these are the tools you use is really empowering, I think, for our
Mm-hmm.
listeners and viewers to understand. Just like you're saying, it's fringe and mainstream, but the research is there. And for those of us who are practicing quantum biology in our practices, there's no looking back because it is hands down the most effective thing that I've seen in my practice. And I hear you saying that now as well. Um, so, absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you educate your patients on light exposure and the benefits or adverse effects of it?
Yeah, I do tailor prescriptions to cases. And, a lot of that has to do with the latitude and the season. So if I can just tell someone to go outside, that's the easiest thing to start with.
Mhm.
Telling somebody that who lives in Norway in January, it's not exactly practical. But then you have to get them thinking, okay, well, no one's ever lived in your latitude without sweat lodge or sauna, or and if you can't get those, at least get some red infrared light therapy going. And then people start to tune into this, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, I can do that. And so I start with that because the number one thing is you've got to restore these frequencies of red and infrared light to the body because they're so powerful, they're so healing, they're what the mitochondria create. And the mitochondria today are just ailing, they're sick, they need help.
Mhm.
And using red and infrared light from panels or saunas, depending on the case, is really what can help you um, get the patient's physiology back on track. Sauna is interesting because it does create a lot of nutrient, or rather, I should say, mineral loss, and it's a fair demand on someone's physiology to go into a sauna. I have seen people with nutritional and specifically mineral deficiencies where I've said, look, don't go crazy with sauna. And I've had people who are doing a lot of sauna get better when they put the pause on sauna because they realized it was really depleting them of minerals. Um, and then the second thing beyond the sauna, red light, infrared light is getting them, like I said, back out into the sun. But that's not only for the red and infrared light, it's for the visible light. because that visible light is what really sets their circadian rhythms, particularly in the blue and green ranges. So you need to get that. And I'll have them do things like download a lux meter on their phone, see how many lux they're in their home, their office, their apartment, whatever. Frequently, it's very, very, very little. Going outside, they're in hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands times as much light as they are indoors. And that's why just, 3 10-minute walks a day, that's what Jim, strength and conditioning coach that I work with, he gets people started on 3 10-minute walks a day. And it's an absolutely slam dunk way to get people's circadian timing better, get their energy levels up. Don't have them wear sunglasses so they're getting uninterrupted, unfiltered light into their eye. And then the last component is really the ultraviolet light, because without the ultraviolet light, the body really doesn't get the signals that it needs in order to make, and the energy it needs to make things like vitamin D. Just today, I was looking at ultraviolet lights, and I saw, before and after pictures of somebody who has vitiligo, which is a skin condition with depigmentation of the skin, and you get these pale spots near, that look unsightly compared to the rest of your skin. And the UVA therapy can completely clear that up. And the sad thing is that most consumers think that that must be bad for them, which is just not true. Using these things therapeutically, there's no evidence that they're dangerous. It's only when you use tanning beds. And I would point out that tanning beds don't have, number one, strong components of UVB, and number two, they don't have strong components of red and infrared light. So, that's where I start. It's trying to restore these different frequencies of light. It pretty much boils down to red, infrared, blue, green, brightness during the day, ultraviolet light, as far as the frequencies of light that people really need in order to be healthy. And then again, depending on their latitude, their situation in life, how many hours they're working, how much time they have for their wellness, I work it all in based on that.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Can you walk us through some of the differences that our body experiences with red, near infrared versus the blue-green tones, and why you're wanting people to get that full spectrum of light?
Yeah. So the red infrared light frequencies, and there's some very specific bands within those very broad categories of light that have these positive effects on the body. These are mediated at many different levels. So frankly, it's very difficult to sort of summarize all the health benefits of red and infrared light.
Sure.
That's kind of one of the beautiful things about it. You're getting so much therapeutic value for so little. You buy, and people look at the panels and they think, wow, these are really expensive. If people want to see the ones that I use, they can go to my Substack blog. I wrote a blog called the Quick and Simple Guide to Red and Infrared Light Therapy. But at the end of the day, these panels, for hundreds of dollars, you get hundreds of thousands of hours worth of light. You probably won't have to replace one of these, lamps during your lifespan unless something mechanically goes wrong, which is possible. But even so, you're getting a huge amount of light. And that's the other great thing about them, is that people don't have an infinite amount of time to use these devices. It's not really practical to use them like for long periods of time at, say, a desk at work, for a variety of reasons. But anyway, so you get a huge amount of red infrared light. It works in many different ways. The most important, I think, of these to tell people about is that red infrared light on the skin, A, help to structure water, which then helps to improve cellular energy production and generation. And then number two, they help to support glutathione levels in the mitochondria via the action of melatonin, which they also trigger the synthesis of. So red and infrared light, that's sort of where the benefits start. Improving cellular bioenergetics through structuring of water, improving mitochondrial function, increasing production of melatonin, increasing production of glutathione. And these are some of the initial steps in critical cascades that are, when they get hamstrung or destroyed or impaired in some way, it's synonymous with aging and disease. And when they're running well, it's synonymous with good health.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what are you finding with your patient population? What are some of the biggest obstacles they have to creating this light environment for their health?
The number one is time and the modern built environment. So let's say I have a very successful, patient in a cold, dark place like Illinois or Maine. and they work a very strenuous job. They go to work, it's dark. They come home, it's dark. How do I fit light therapy into their life? Things I try to do is say, look, maximize the amount of natural light that you can get. Eat your lunch outside. If it's too cold, eat it near a window. Um, Even if it's too cold and you can't get lunch outside, buy a bright lamp for your office. I like incandescent bulbs for those lamps. Sometimes it's not feasible based on wattage or it heats up the office too much or whatever. One of the things I like to tell them to do is to get a little handheld or small desk-based unit like the EMR Tech Firewave or the BioLight Shine, um, and put those on the desk. The Shine comes with a nice little stand so you can angle it different ways. And that way you can use that throughout the day in order to get at least a little bit of red infrared light. And it's only going to be on the face or the exposed skin, but it's better than nothing. And it's particularly better than not getting any red infrared light on your sun exposed, or I should say light exposed skin, because one of the things I believe is that indoor lighting is actually causing more skin cancer than the sun. When you look at how indoor lighting, which is very harsh, very high in the blues and greens, it causes lipid peroxidation. And that lipid peroxidation, while it doesn't cause an overt sunburn like the sun does with high UVA content,
Mhm.
it still creates oxidative stress in the skin. And this is why so many people will wind up with things like melanoma in areas of the body, on areas of the skin where they don't have any sun exposure. So those are some of the things that I'll tell them to do. Now, if I've got more flexibility in the day, particularly if they can start work later or come home later, then I want to be working in a 20-minute light therapy session. That could be a quick sauna session. I don't want them to just use a sauna that's got infrared light. I want there to be a red component so they're getting that full spectrum. And then on top of that, I will sometimes tell them I want you to use a UVB lamp. The UVB, and people can read my thoughts on this and are you getting enough UV light? It's another of my blog posts. I like the Spurdy D. It's a strong UVB band light that basically it's boosting your vitamin D levels with all of the attendant benefits, and then it also obviates the need for the use of vitamin D supplements. And 3, 5, 7 sessions a week, 5 minutes each, keeps people's vitamin D levels at a really nice level. And that's the basic protocol for patients that I use.
That's wonderful. And it's so simple. I know when people are making lifestyle changes, telling them to get into a gym 4 days a week or, wake up early and start lifting weights or
Right,
cut out that food.
right.
I mean, these things are ways for our body to capture electrons, photons, particles, quantum particles of
Mm-hmm,
energy
mm-hmm.
without
Right.
those, yeah, excessive lifestyle changes. And what are you seeing as the benefits of this? Do you have any anecdotes or any stories with patients where, um, yeah, I was telling someone a story just yesterday of someone that came in with an autoimmune condition, and the only thing that she changed was her circadian rhythm. And it was a lichen sclerosis diagnosis, and within
Yeah.
6 weeks, it was completely gone without any other changes. And I'm sure that, you know, as you would see in your practice, you see lots of patients, and I know that you're having really tremendously successful outcomes. Is there something that you could share with us so that viewers understand how powerful this is and that it isn't accompanied with a $1,000 bag of supplements or, you
Yeah,
know,
absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm.
So the number one thing that people tell me when they fix their light environment is that their fatigue improves. And so people need to realize that the melatonin, first of all, having bad lighting environment at night with lots of blue and green light shuts down their natural melatonin release, shortens the amount of time that the melatonin is active, and really wrecks their sleep quality. The flip side of that is you've got to have adequate light during the day, as we just talked about, in order for melatonin levels to be normal anyway. So, and this relationship of melatonin, the hormone of darkness or the hormone of sleep, with energy, because what I tell people about melatonin is it's really like the janitor of the body. It runs around and it says, okay, cells, it's time for you to turn over and fix this and fix that and kick out the debris and then bring in new nutrients and regenerate, right? And just like a janitor, if it shows up and the cell is busy because the cell still thinks that it's daytime, the janitor can't do anything. It's like, oh, the kids are in the classroom, you can't sweep, they're in the way.
Mhm.
Basically, is how I look at it. And so, energy is the number one thing that people start to see improve. But energy is just a marker for overall cellular bioenergetics. How much resource does the body have in order to meet its needs?
Mhm.
And so, as energy improves, all kinds of other medical problems will go away. Skin conditions will get better, brain fog, will get better, pains, aches, weight gain, failure to gain muscle. I mean, practically any problem that I'm trying to get a handle on. And if I had to pick a top five for my patients, it would be brain fog is probably their number one complaint, tied with fatigue. And I view brain fog as basically just being fatigue of the brain. Um, and then stubborn weight gain or failure to lose weight. I might lump, glucose intolerance and diabetes in there, but I don't have a lot of diabetics coming to me. Sexual dysfunction and disorders, that's anything from low libido to impotence to premature ejaculation to anything. I see a lot of men for these issues. Um, and fifth would be depression and anxiety.
Mhm.
Depression and anxiety, of course, really everyone's really looking into and focused on the neurotransmitters. I found it very interesting to see that there were some papers recently released that really argued that the neurotransmitter basis of depression is a flawed
Yeah.
theory. I do think it's very flawed. There's a lot of psychosomatic stuff going on there. I get into this with my patients, their psychology, trauma, their
Mhm.
emotions. Are they actually taking care of themselves?
Mhm.
um, and so that's all a component of that as well, with interesting quantum tie-ins that we could talk about sometime. But anyway, all of those problems effectively can be, in my opinion, the FDA would probably hang me for this, treated, or at least I think red infrared light deficiency, let's say, can contribute to or does contribute to all of these problems. And the same with, inadequate light during the day. I mean, just look at seasonal affective disorder, right? Which is, this seasonal depression of the winter. What's funny to me about seasonal affective disorder is that when you look at the amount of light in the average modern indoor office space, which the idiots in charge are trying to light as cheaply as possible, the amount of light in the office is nothing. Your home at night is as bright as your office, and they're not very bright. And compare that with the sun, which is hundreds of thousands of times as strong. So, in my opinion, every American today with depression has what we would call seasonal affective disorder due to an indoor lifestyle.
Mhm.
And I would frankly defy anyone to disprove that theory with a study. Certainly in my practice, fixing the light environment for these people, plus using the right supplements, because you can really change somebody's neurochemistry with the right supplements and or hormones. And
Mhm.
it's funny, I just today had multiple calls to go over hormone panels. And
Oh.
I'm looking at these hormone panels and I'm just asking what's going on in your life? How much sleep were you getting when this was drawn? Blah 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 blah. People's hormones are largely low in modern life because they're overexerting themselves at the gym, they're working too many hours, they're taking on too many things, they're too stressed, and
Mhm.
they're not just taking enough time to relax, be present in their life, engage in normal, appropriate, healthy self-care. What's funny about that is it's appropriate and it's healthy, but I don't actually think it's normal. It could certainly not be called common. It's like common sense. It's very rare. And so all these problems are just being papered over by doctors, therapists, all kinds of practitioners who don't realize that light, it ties into all this. Of course, the sad thing about that is we've known about these ties at least indirectly and to a certain extent for over 100 years now, since we started studying the effects of light on biology in the early 1900s.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I love that you bring in anxiety and depression because even trauma, we can see there was a
Yeah.
recent study that was released this year showing that repeated chronic stressors or traumatic events actually disrupt our circadian rhythm just in and of itself, right? And so that on top of all of our modern day disruption just really has the cards stacked against us, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me. And so for our viewers watching, what are a couple first steps that they should be taking to? I know you talked a little bit about somebody living in Illinois and how they
Yeah.
would, how you would tailor that with additional light. What about for the rest of us who are super busy, getting up, getting into that car, going into the cubicle, getting
Yeah.
home exhausted? What are some easy ways for people listening now, just as an introductory little step? What are some simple steps that we can take, just an average person, to help dial in that light environment?
So number one is avoiding artificial light at night with a combination of, and when I say artificial light at night, what people need to realize is that it's not all created equal. Any blue and green light in the environment after dark is fundamentally unnatural. You can get trace amounts, very small amounts, in incandescent bulbs, but it's hardly enough in many cases to really disrupt sleep in a significant way. Um, the caveat to that is people have a varying degree of sensitivity. So the less blue and green light that you get after dark, the better. That means low blue light bulbs or zero blue light bulbs or very warm incandescent bulbs or red lights or red headlamps or whatever. I've seen a lot of different people do a lot of different things. And then you got to remember that works on the other side of the night too. So if you're waking up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, protecting your circadian rhythms as much as possible so they don't get shifted forward is key. So these early morning workers need to realize that. It's not practical, frankly, in a lot of places where it's dark at, you know, 5 o'clock, let alone 8 o'clock in the morning,
Mhm.
to really live in like your true circadian rhythm or environment because people just literally wouldn't be able to work. They'd have like a 4 hour window in order to get all their work done, and the rest of the time they would be doing what? Sleeping or reading by candlelight. Hey, if you can get away with that, good for you. I
I was
basically
gonna say,
did that.
sounds good.
Yeah, I did that for like 2 years because I had the luxury of being able to, and I slept amazingly well. Felt incredibly well rested each morning, but it just doesn't. It wasn't possible. I chose not to do it after a while.
Yeah.
So that's number one. And then number two is somehow incorporating more light, maximizing the amount of visible red and infrared, and to a certain extent, UV light that you get during the day. Taking walks outside, not wearing sunglasses unless it's really too bright and you just can't handle it. Only using sunscreen or covering up from the sun when you need to in order to avoid frank over sunburn. um, Positioning yourself next to the window. Little things will matter, like people have an indoor, study or alcove that's dark and not near a window. They like it because there's no screen glare and it's sort of dark. It's better to put up with a certain amount of screen glare and have it by a window and get that increase in natural light. And you'll easily get a feel for this by downloading a lux meter on your phone and seeing, oh, okay, I'm next to the window. The lux here is X, and over there in the dark alcove, it's Y. It's tens and hundreds fold different, which once people see it, it really helps them understand, oh wow, I'm really seeing a big difference in my light environment that I didn't really appreciate because your eye constricts and dilates in order to allow more light in when it's darker. So little things like that, frankly, make a huge difference, particularly in people who've been in an ugly, terrible light environment. And then picking up some kind of red infrared light therapy device or sauna, for which there's so many options. And again, I've got those covered over on my Substack blog if people want to read more about that, because it's funny. I can make it very simple, but there's a lot of ins and outs. And I've had people come in and I've recommended barrel saunas to them, or I've recommended indoor saunas, or I've recommended, the sauna space sauna, or I recommended, bigger saunas than the sauna space. So it's all, I do tailor it to people, but those are the simple things that people can do.
Thank you. Thank you for walking us through that. So many great tips in this talk. Thank you so much for sharing your time.